Welcome everyone to our January Fireside Chat hosted by Digital Square. At Digital Square, we work with innovators, governments, and donors to support digital health programs through adaptable, interoperable tools that are designed to work seamlessly together. One of the ways we do this is by hosting webinars like this. So today is a very informal session. You bring your questions and we hopefully help point you in the right direction. And we'll do our best here to answer as many questions as we can about FHIR today. As you all know, our FHIR expert is Jose, who is a data management standards and interoperability expert who has been contributing to global healthcare standards for over a decade. He's facilitated the launch of HL7 and IHE work groups in Brazil, Portugal, and Belgium, and has worked on numerous digital health projects around the world. At Digital Square, Jose supports our work in Vietnam to create a dashboard for community health workers for digital tools. So I think without further ado, Jose, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Brenda. Indeed, this is an informal session, so welcome, everyone. We are just open to topics for discussion, looking forward to see what are your questions. Each one of us, myself included, might have some recent memory of something that was discussed or some problems that are open or some pains that we are going through. And these sessions are exactly about leaving the agenda open for those discussions. So if today or if yesterday I was thinking, you know, this how to do testing on FHIR, this is difficult. Okay, then maybe this will contaminate our discussion today. Maybe not. Maybe it's something about data management. Maybe it's something about data quality. Maybe it's something about case reporting. And it's a free and open discussion that we should have here. So with that and setting the scene for that, it's really pretty much a round table. I just have more exposure to the HL7 FHIR community than some of you, but this is pretty much a round table. Actually, it's pretty much we're sitting in the round circle around the FHIR chat. So please let us know or let me know what, or let the others know what challenges do you have, what questions do you like to see discussed. I may have the answer, I may not have the answer. There's typically not one answer for each question. There's things to be discovered, good questions that no one has answered yet. So I'm looking forward. What topics do we want to discuss? What ideas do you bring and what pains do you bring to us today?
Feel free to jump off of mute or throw the questions in chat. We're happy to field them in any way.
The awkward silence is on purpose. It's for you to speak up, please. If you don't have any challenges, any questions, feel free just to say what you are doing with FHIR, because that might trigger others to jump in and say, oh, wait, I've done that as well, or I'm still planning to do something like that. So really feel free to just jump in on the chat or speak up. I can call up on some of you. We did not have a round, you know, an introduction round, so I don't know if we want to have that. If I may invite you to just say what you're looking into. Nadia, order my screen. Nadia, do you want to share with us what you're busy with or what you want to take out of any discussions on FHIR? Hello, Nadia.
Oh, sorry, I think there might be a problem with how things are logged in. This is not Nadia. Nadia and I work together. I seem to be logged in her account for some bizarre reason. Nadia and I work together at Gembi Health Systems, and what we're currently doing is we're just implementing a master patient index system to fit in with the rest of like the dicey plans that Gembi has installed. So we're just trying to understand more about what FHIR has to offer.
And you're not Nadia. More?
Sorry, yes, that's important. Bruce Dickey. I have no idea why I seem to be registered under her name.
Okay. So master patient index. That's an interesting thing. Maybe we can check with. I presume you're somewhat related, or your work is somewhat related to what Christopher is doing. Christopher, is that?
Yes. Thanks, Jose. Yeah, I'm Chris Sebrex. I'm also with GEMB Health Systems and with Bruce as well. Yeah, it's part of a wider project that we're working on that you know about, of course, the TAP project, where we are implementing a FHIR-based data integration platform, and what Bruce is speaking about, the client registry or patient identification, patient matching and linking system is part of that. So yeah, I was going to wait till Bruce was done, and then, perhaps just, mention some of the work that we're doing around that, and some of the challenges or some of the opportunities that we see for the implementation of FHIR within the African setting. And yeah, just maybe chat a bit about that if there's time on this call, and get your thoughts on that. Some of the directions we might be taking. So,
That's awesome.
Sorry, Bruce, I didn't want to interrupt. Perhaps you can, describe further the work on the client registry component.
Sure. So basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a client registry or master patient index, and we're going to be using dgraph to effectively store the essential demographic data of lots of people. One of the questions is, what is the essential demographic data? At what point do you stop and stop recording certain information? What is too much? What is too little? And from there, dgraph is fantastic for creating relational-based information. So we create our master patients and link that with the important source IDs that would reference the remaining medical records that exist in another database. If that's a concise enough explanation.
That's cool. I'll get back to this, but maybe this can bring some bridges, or we can look at the broader scope or get new insight. If I just ask Rebecca, what is she working on, assuming that's Rebecca and not someone pretending to be Rebecca on the other side?
I am the real Rebecca. So I have to admit to lurking. I am an epidemiologist, just started working for a tech company, and I am desperately trying to catch up on all of the things tech. So learning about HL7 and FHIR, and I can now spell API. So I'm just sort of sticking my nose into things and trying to learn by submersion, if you will. So anything that you're talking about, it's helpful for me to listen to and just sort of pick up on.
I will try to keep that in mind during this conversation, but pretty much if you know an API, sorry, something is falling behind me. That FHIR is a standard API for healthcare. Sorry, there's these wires hanging behind me, and so I just put it behind the screen. And last time they fell, my internet was off for the rest of the session. Good that it's an informal session. The other one was not. The FHIR defines, so it's a community that defines a standard API for most things healthcare, meaning that how do you exchange patient information? How do you exchange prescriptions? How do you exchange device information? How do you exchange laboratory reports? And how do you exchange those things? And how do you put those things together in a way that they are searchable, accessible, that you still maintain some privacy? And what exactly does the patient name consist of? Well, in most countries, it's like first name and last name, but more AKA family name and given name, but that's really not the same thing as first and last, depending on where you are in the world. So FHIR is a community that standardizes some of this thing, and also the behavior, like how do you do searches, etc. And what we are talking about is how to use that and the tooling and the processes behind it. So if we want to use FHIR, there's a standardization process, which is, for example, taking what Bruce started discussing. I'm just taking that example before we go in there into more detail. But if you have what data is necessary about the patient, good. There's a way in FHIR to define some data objects. Okay, regardless of the technical implementation, which is the FHIR technical standard, there is also a FHIR, let's say, process way. So there's FHIR, the standard FHIR, and our FHIR process. In our FHIR process, we have this need so often that we are starting to define some good practices on how to document the minimum data sets. And to document those minimum data sets, you say, okay, this is really mandatory, the patient name, but do you want to split the name into all its components? Well, sometimes you may, sometimes you may not. And you can define that. Other things is like, what can we search upon? Can we search on the national patient identifier? Well, in some cases, it's actually not allowed to search on that because you're not supposed to have that unless you're really, really tightly connected to the patient, in which case you should have some evidence to that. So what we are discussing is pretty much how the process of doing digital health standardization, how this links to different use cases. So Rebecca, this can get very nerdy very quickly. I will do my best not to always try to come up for some oxygen and say, oh, and what this means is that this impacts privacy or whatever. If I'm lost down the rabbit hole, just please say, hey, come back, and I will come back to the human way of talking.
I appreciate that. Don't feel like you need to dumb things down for me either. I have.
No, it's not dumbing down. It's really going to the functional side, because that's something that is not commonly done. We tend to get lost in technology, and technology is the center of it. Well, it's not. It's actually something else, like the guy that's sitting or that's lying on the bed. That should be, and whatever we can do, we technical guys can do to help refocus that and not get everyone dragged onto the black hole of technology. That I'm really happy with that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Right. And we have Richard. Richard, we are just asking what people, so this is an informal chat, as you know, what topics, what things we are discussing about. And Bruce mentioned that, and Chris mentioned that they are doing something on master patient index. I'm actually interested in discussing a bit more that to learn myself what is there. Rebecca is getting familiar with all these FHIR and APIs and all these things. And Richard, what topics are you into and what do you want to discuss? This is an open chat, so I'm looking for topics.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. So I'd like to discuss, well, I mean, that's great. I'll throw out some crazy ideas. I'm curious about how we distinguish between, well, okay, first of all, how we use identifiers in a real world context. So I've been making lots of examples that use, for example, business system identifiers, which talk about the real world. You know, maybe that's a government issued ID, or maybe that's a facility code, right? Versus when it starts to move over into coded elements, like a codable concept. Like a country is a codable concept. It's a value set in code system, but a facility is not, which is weird because they're both real. They both have geographies. They both kind of whatever. So that I'm curious about how in the real world folks manage that. Do you just do referencing by logical identifier based on the business identifier, or do you use URN, UUIDs? And so I'm just kind of looking for the real world learning from that. Actually, that's my big hang up right now is that it's very frustrating because in FHIR you say like, well, there's an ID in FHIR, but don't use that because that's server assigned. There's a literal reference, a canonical reference, but you only use a canonical reference if it's a conformance resource or something. And it is sometimes the specification is too much. So I'll stop my video. That's my thing.
Oh, that's great. So we have so the patient ID stuff, and Rebecca, the moment arrived a bit too soon. So when we start entering this, we are completely lost down the rabbit hole. But I will keep my promise to to emerge every now and then. So this will be more how do we use the technology thing. And Richard, because we started this with the patient ID, with the patient matching, I wonder if it's okay that we just address that and start, discussion contaminating each other. If it's okay to start with the patient ID, just because we started discussing it first, and it's because
we all love patient IDs. Let's do it. That's great.
Or patient data demographics. Patient IDs, I think, is one part of that. So I think these are connected, but also we might have a small chance of making it sensible, or making it make any sense for Rebecca to follow up when we get to the technology part, because it can get heavy. I'm not saying that it's difficult. It's just that we might go into the weeds a bit. So Bruce, what is this tool that you were mentioning, dgraph? I haven't heard of it.
Well, dgraph is just I suppose the way that we're going to be storing information. I suppose you can look at the different kinds of databases being, some of them being like a key value. Dgraph specifically tries to relate things based on relationship data, because when we are generating our master patients, these are based on similarity scores from the matching and linking algorithms that we'll be implementing. So we want to...
This one?
Yes, exactly that one.
Yeah, I really like graph databases, so sorry for the nerd thing. I think they should be more used exactly for this. I'm really happy that you take that choice. I'm also curious to see how we will match that into FHIR. Let me assume that you have a graph of connected objects, right? So you have the objects with some properties. Your connections will also have some properties, like this patient is a child of that patient, where those two things are both detailed objects. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the main the main two types of nodes that we'll have are the master patients and the source IDs that relate to the actual medical records that sit in another database.
Can you give an example?
Well, effectively, if you get some lab results, that will have its own attached source ID, and it will have all the demographic data. So in the event of like mistaking or just having multiple lab results and pharmacy results, clinics, hospital, all this information, we just want to make that all then be able to relate to a single master patient. And then once the master patient is found, we can pull all that information and like view it longitudinally.
This is awesome. So basically, if you get something like, this is the medication list for the patient while he was on vacation in this other country, this is the name of the patient, this is the name of the parents, this is the name of the city where the patient was born, or whatever demographics that you have, then you can say, well, this ID doesn't mean anything to me because I'm not in that country, but looking at this and these data elements, I can actually figure out that this is the same patient as I had here with the other ID. Is that kind of where you're going?
To a certain degree. It would be nice to be able to fetch information and then make this work across borders and different health systems. But we are more still focusing on just a national database.
Sure. Sorry for the example. But what you want then is not just to check that the patient is that one, but you also might want to enrich your master patient data with whatever you fish from the different sources. Is that it?
Yeah, in theory, a healthcare worker can search for this single patient, and then once they found that single patient, access data from a whole bunch of sources of medical records that should be in a central data repository.
So it is a graph of patients, but it would become a graph of patient information, right? So each one of your nodes, from what I understand, could quickly become the entry point for whatever is about that patient under that system, right? So you say, this is the patient in that system. From this is our wormhole to go into that universe and see what is out there about the patient. Am I going through that? Oh.
Yes, so that master patient is then linked to a whole bunch of their medical history, effectively.
Exactly. This is awesome. No, this is really good. I don't think there's anything, or not in our immediate projects that I'm aware of. There's nothing like this. It's really interesting. yeah, so the question will be how to use or what data elements do you need and what is your minimal data? Do you have the notion of matching degree? Like how good is your matching? You know, if you have different patients from different systems, how do you validate that this is really the same patient? If you have a guy called José Costa from Portugal, you might not have just one person.
So we are implementing the FHIR algorithm, which is kind of a nice and fancy way of fuzzy matching that then implements what's called the expectation maximization algorithm to create what we refer to as MNU values, matching and unmatching values. So if we say, for example, the name Jose is a fairly common name, the fact that when we come across two things where Jose matches, we won't necessarily give that a high score because it's a common name. But then we'll also be looking, so the name, surname, date of birth, and basically whatever other reliable demographic information is available. There are certain things that we have to take into consideration of city. People change cities and zip codes or areas all the time. So that makes it a little bit less reliable. Cell phone numbers, in theory, should be reliable, but that technically can also change. ID numbers and passport numbers would be fantastic, but not everyone in the setting that we're looking at has that. But at the moment, the work that we've been doing into the fuzzy matching using the FHIR algorithm, based on our synthetic data that we've been producing, has shown very, very robust results when it comes to accurately matching and not matching records.
And can you peel off the algorithms in the sense that if you realize that the moment that you move to another language or the moment that you move to another country, you want to re-implement this, and then you need to reconsider your algorithms, or at least the threshold of acceptance there. Are those things easy for you to peel off, or are they built into the database? I'm just curious, technically curious here.
So yes, I would say so. The underlying premise of the FHIR in terms of what it classifies as what is close and what isn't. This has been a while. There's an algorithm. It's not the Levenstein algorithm. It's not coming to my mind. But it's basically a similarity score when comparing string fields. Okay. So the more similar the actual text field is, the better it is. So naturally, there are some languages that this doesn't immediately doesn't help. But for most parts, if it's a character-based language, then that can be extrapolated to almost any language then. If that's
right, sorry, yeah, I'm still assuming that we have this alphabetic thing, which in some places might not apply. I do not know.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Levenstein is one you mentioned. Oh no, this is interesting.
It's called Jarrow Winkler. There we go. It's been 2 months since I worked on that formula.
What is it?
Jarrow Winkler.
Jarrow, like this?
Winkler. Yeah. Winkler. There we go.
Oh, just to say that Richard's making some interesting comments in the chat as well, which would be interesting perhaps to just ask him to elaborate, perhaps.
Right, so that gets into the FHIR thing. I was trying to see what would be the bridge to the thing that I wanted to discuss with Richard, which is the references in FHIR. But yeah, actually, I'll do my job and let you guys hand over. So this is the moment where I would say, Rebecca, we are now just seeing how you can try to do this patient matching and getting data about the patient, and we're going to the technical part. So have fun with us. So, Richard, you want to jump in on this, on the matching and the algorithms?
Sure. So, I mean, there's many ways to implement a patient registry, client registry. We built a prototypical system for our own use case. But I don't want to promote that. What I want to promote is a methodology and discuss the methodology. And that is that you have an originating system, right? So let's say you have some kind of EMR system. It submits a record, it submits patient demographical information, nothing clinical, first of all. Like, don't use any data you don't need. Just send demographical information. It stores that, and then let's say another system submits a demographical record, it stores that, and then it runs these algorithms, which have already been mentioned, which are kind of the best practices in the industry if you just read through the academic literature about patient identity matching and algorithms and stuff, like Jarrow Winkler, et cetera. So it could do those kind of things and some probabilistic stuff. But the point is that you have the ability to create a record linkage. So you don't destroy, you don't change identifiers of the patients. What you do is you create a third record, and the third record is the golden ID, which has just links to those source systems and source records. So you're not actually, this is just kind of an enterprise record linkage approach where you don't actually destroy anything. All you do is create a separate record that says, oh yeah, records 1 and 2 are actually probably the same person. That way you're non-destructively linking people together, and that's fun. But so you have, like, for example, a third patient resource, which uses links, which is a kind of a standard FHIR metadata thing in any resource. So you just have links in it. But how do you go from there to something that you can use and in a clinical setting? And that's our challenge. So we've been trying to do that with CQL. It could be done with SQL. It could be done in several different ways. You could copy all the data, clinical records, and then change all the identifiers. So it gets a bit hairy, and it's interesting. So I'm interested how other people approach it. It's been an ongoing discussion for the past 6 months or so with PEPFAR, trying to figure out if something like this were implemented, how would you do it in a safe way? Ideally, of course, you do it just for your use case, right? So you only use the clinical data you absolutely need. You depersonalize it as much as possible after you've linked the patient records, and you do it in memory almost. You don't actually transmit that information over the wire and just do aggregate reporting based on that, because that's our use case. I should have started with that, is aggregate reporting. So it's I love seeing patient matching. I'm curious how you go from patient matching to your use case, whether that's case-based surveillance or aggregate reporting or whatever. So
I'm catching up here. So the idea is that then you have a P3 from the algorithm. You'll say, okay, from the algorithm we determine that this P1 and this P2 they are the same thing, and you don't touch P1, you don't touch P2, you have a P3 which is somehow related to P1 and P2 because your system says these are actually the same people, right?
That's exactly right. You're really fast, by the way. Just, yeah, at graphics. That's correct.
What I want to do is this, because I wanted to enter your problem, my system.id1 or ID3. So the problem that we'll have here is that you'll have this, and here you have, regardless of the other data that you have, is that here you have your system.id1, right?
That's right. Maybe what I'll do is, well, Chris's team knows our product pretty well, actually. Let me paste an example of what a linkage file looks like, because it's really simple. Like if you can read JSON, you're sorted, and it gives you an idea of what a record linkage could look like. And again, I'm not shilling our own process here. I just want to. I enjoy this kind of conversation. I'd really love to know how folks, kind of move in between. How you reconcile patients. I mean, it's certainly a challenge.
Right. So, so assuming that this is what we'll have, so we have in P1 your system.id1, in P2 your other system ID2, and so we have different identifiers or potential different identifiers for different systems, and you don't even know which identifiers they have, because maybe this guy uses an internal identifier like the hospital identifier, this guy uses the lab system identifier. Maybe they have a common national identifier, maybe not. If they do, then you don't have a problem. If they do not, then you do have a thing to address. So this is the, okay, this, and then, yeah, there is one data term or one data management term that I would like to put on the table. I don't know if this helps you, Richard, but it came to my mind when you were discussing the codes and the identifiers. In my mind, when in the groups that I learned this with, there is reference data and there is master data. Reference data is the data that everyone uses as a reference. For example, country codes. You have DE, BE, FR, ES, US. You have all these codes. These are references for everyone. And then you have master data, which is the thing that within a given context, you want to keep a golden record of. It means it doesn't fall from the sky. It means that you have to maintain it. So patients is really master data. So that's why I have a master patient index. It's really something that you want to keep that as a reference. If by assumption, if one's government would say from now on, like every week, say, this is the current list of citizens in this country, and then they would put it there, then this could become, reference data that you no longer have to maintain those things. But this is not like list of customers, list of whatever. These are things that evolve, but for which, as they evolve, you want to keep track of, and you want to identify them as and keeping track of them. And sometimes they might be the same, they might not be the same, they might seem to be the same. So you want to merge them, and sometimes they seem to be the same, but they are not the same. So that is just my starting point. I don't know if this makes sense to you. If you want to comment while I open your JSON.
Yeah, it makes sense for sure. Yeah.
Okay,
so if you can see, if you go down to links, what it's doing. It's just saying this is the golden record, and here are the different links to those patients. The challenge is going from there. This isn't related to my identifier question, by the way, but yeah, this is about managing patient identities and patient demographical linkages. This is a way to do it. You create a separate record which has the links to the originating systems files. That's it.
Okay. Right, so this one does not contain any data. This is just the linkage to all the others, right? So the patient will still have prescriptions under this ID, and they will still have lab results under this other ID. All these things will happen, but this one is the master, the one that links them all. Is that correct?
That's right, and even better in terms of operations. And I think this is all IHE PICS-M stuff, by the way. But in terms of operations, you can lock it down. So all you can do as a submitting system is say, here's some demographic details, right? And then you get your golden record ID. It returns no patient data. So you can't brute force it to get patient data. You have to have node authentication to even submit a request, and you can't get anything back if you do. All you get is an ID. And if you change IDs, no big deal. You just make a new golden ID. So it worked for the context in which we were in. But there are transactions that PICS-M gets into. I believe it's PICS-M, and there may be a PDQ-M as well, which does what. I forget which one PDQ-M is, but the point is there are a couple things in IHE to look at this.
Yeah, the PDQ-M is the query, the PICS is the cross matching.
That's right, yeah.
Diagrams. So let's see. PICS, let me just look the previous version. There should be some, oops, not this one. This one, where is it? I remembered one diagram, but it's not here. This, not this one. This one. Can you see it? Well, let me see. Open the image. Oops. Open image. New tab. Yeah. So each system has their own patient identifier in each domain. And then if you have these functions, you can say, well, if one system can get the patient identifier from one domain and from another domain and from another domain, then by looking at the patient identities, then they can actually say, well, from now on, what you know as this person, I will know it as the other person, but it's okay, we are still talking about the same person. So in the cross-reference manager, I think is actually doing exactly what you just had there, which is just creating these things.
That's right. And I like the idea of using a graph database with nodes and edges to traverse this. That's probably way more performant, especially if it's in memory. Like, you know, that's milliseconds query time. I mean, that small milliseconds, that'd be really performant. It'd be interesting to see that kind of implementation.
And for me, more intuitive and more natural to design, right? Because these are connected objects. These are not fixed.
Exactly. They're not database row.
Yeah. So yeah. So the thing that I see here is exactly these references. So I would like to address the thing that you mentioned, Richard, for the how to use identifiers and all those things. I mean, I don't know what is the solution, but is it okay for the others if we just go a bit into that on the use of identifiers and logical references and those things?
Yeah, fine with me.
Sure.
Are you considering, so Richard, are you considering logical references? Just because I don't know if I have to mention what I have to mention or what I have to learn.
Right. So I probably had too much coffee today. So let me just step back. What I'm trying to say is, okay, in a real world situation where you have FHIR servers that are deployed, they're assigning their own IDs, but you've got to deal with, for example, government, business system identifiers, and you have to deal with situations, especially in LMICs, where you have an HMIS like DHIS2, which has its own IDs for facilities, right? For example, and you need to link those into encounters. So how do you manage those links when you're dealing with the server assigned ID? Maybe something might be in a code system as an ID. Maybe something is a business identifier. And I'm just looking for kind of best practices. Above, I pasted a copy of, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but the UK NHS policy on identifiers. And it's pretty straightforward and interesting. There's only a few, a few cautionings there. So I know you work, of course, in the HL7 chapter as well. So you see a lot of real world use cases. So if you can just share or rant, I mean, it doesn't matter. I just want to hear someone smart talk about this because I'm trying to get my head around it.
Awesome. So let me just go right into that. So let me just bring a bit of, so let me just backtrack a bit just for it to make sense. And first of all, for not going too nerdy on this without this technical context. And also for whatever I'm saying, if there is any discrepancy, something that you disagree, please let me know because I might have explained it wrong or I might have it wrong in my head. So in FHIR, all most of the resources that need to be identified, so things that need to be identified like a patient or medication, they will have an identifier. And that is zero to many identifiers. So some resources, they call this business identifier. It could be the request identifier. So the requests resources, they also have an identifier because you need the unique request number in order to fulfill it, and in order to bill it, and in order to take whatever other action on this. Now, if we look at identifiers, there is it's a data type. This is maybe more for Rebecca to see to follow up on the technical side. Where is it? The identifier data type has, for us, what I care most about is the system and the value. Like the system says what kind of identifier this is, and the value is what's the value of this identifier. So this is an example of, this is a system, so that's the social security number, and the identifier will be my social security number. But since the identifier is zero to many, I can have my social security number and my driver's license and my passport number and my national number and my whatever number and my hospital number. So we can accumulate all of those. That's why it's zero to many. So first thing, this is what we should use. I think also I'm coming now from a bit of an implementation perspective. I would use this, not the server assigned ID, because you have very little control over this. And you have very little control of when it was deleted and the patient was reinstated. Does it preserve the same ID? Does the same ID persist or not? All of those things are technical, and you really don't want to be affecting your functionality because of that technical, I think. So I would say try to use identifiers instead of the ID. So the ID is the internal server assigned thing. I would use always the identifiers. And there, what countries would do, I guess, this is the Australian thing. The other thing is the UK thing. I think they also have this. Yeah, so the NHS number, that's a unique number that's given to a patient. For example, I have a national ID in Portugal and Belgium. I have a patient ID in Portugal and some other countries that I lived in before I got to Belgium. So those, and I can use any of those depending on where I go. Some of those I may or may not, but these numbers are mine. They identify me in different countries. So one thing that we have to do is to identify the system of identification. Sorry if this sounds trivial, bear with me. So one thing that we do is, first of all, identify the, in FHIR, this is the naming system. So we always document the naming systems, and we try to use that, and we try to make it part of our specifications. What naming systems are we considering? So what spaces of identification are we including? So that would be for me one of the requirements. Like the UK has this, they say these are the systems. For the patient, the naming system is the NHS number because they have one. That's fine. If you don't have that and you have a national number, like for example we have in Belgium, then that's fine. But then you see, well, what about refugees and what about immigrants and people that don't have yet a national number because it's a bureaucratic process and you may have it or may not have it. Well, okay, then you have to have another identifier. So then you have the refugee number or the temporary assignment number, immigration number. And as long as you identify which, so sorry for repeating the words, but it's on purpose. As long as you identify the types of identifiers that you want to consider, that which I consider pretty important, then you know where you are navigating at least. Once you do that, and that's the part that I wanted to link to, the identifier has the value in string. And if I look at the reference type, so whenever you refer from a resource to another resource, like you are doing here, Richard, this is a reference to a patient because you are using the reference type, which is a string to a literal reference to the actual URL of the resource, which always has a problem because you don't know where that, or you don't know if you have access to that. You don't know if you will know what exact URL is that is, because that is a random ID in a server that you may not even access to. So the practice that I've seen is that you don't use this. I mean, internally inside your system, you can do this, but when you refer to things across systems, you don't do this, you do logical references. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So literal references like—
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Right. Well, now you added a feature to our client registry. We have to fix that. Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense. So yes, please continue with logical references.
So this is what you're doing, right? This is a absolute
We're
reference
doing
to something that you know where it is, right? So you're doing a reference value, or reference, right? That's what you're doing in a JSON. Whatever it is, there's a reference. That is,
yeah,
that's data.
Yeah, it's a literal reference. In that instance, it's a literal reference, yes.
Right.
Please talk about logical references now.
Right.
Yeah.
Logical references, like, and this is the page that you can go to. Let me just link it here. But I'm going to explain it, and you can always go back to this because I did come back to this a few times, and I'm sure I will go back to this a few times. Pretty much this. If the server does not exist, so if you know that my national number in, for example, in Portugal exists, but there is no server that provides that, so that's pretty pointless to point to my national identifier as a FHIR resource because it doesn't exist. I don't exist as a patient FHIR resource in Portugal, neither in Germany, neither in the Netherlands. So that doesn't work, so pointless. In other cases, maybe it exists, but I don't have access to this. or maybe it exists inside a hospital. And if I exist inside one hospital and the other hospital says, please give me data about this guy, the person that's requesting does not have a clue of what the patient ID is in that thing. So they would have to do all this cross-referencing, which is good if you, but to do that, you have to, I don't know if you can do it in any other way, but you would have to get all the patients and see, oh, thanks for giving me all the patients, and I'll now cross-check. If that is the only way to do it, if I were on the hospital that has the data, I would say, why do you want all my patient data? I would just not give you that, because that's not your thing, that's my thing. So for that is what we use identifiers for. So if we have those reasons that there is no server, the server is not available, or is not seen, is not authorized, or for whatever reasons, you can have a logical reference, which is one of the nice features in FHIR, which is this. You have, instead of using this part of the reference data type, you use this part, which is the identifier. And as an identifier, you can say, well, I'm going to refer to the patient, but not by its unique URL, but by the system, which is by the national number. So by saying that this is a national number or a driver's license number or a passport number, and saying which is the number of that passport or driver license. That's pretty much how you use this concept of logical reference as an identifier, not a reference, and there you have the identifier data type. So you can, let me see if I can, if it's here. No, it's reference, no, it's here. Where is it? Logical references. So yeah, you pretty much do this. Sorry for the XML. You have the system and the value. So you say, I want to refer to the patient in a prescription, for example, or in your link thing that you have there. You say, this is not a reference, but the identifier. And the identifier, you put the system and the value. Whenever you put an identifier, you should put the system. You should not only put the value, because you don't know if you're talking about the driver's license or not. Let me see if there is, oh, and there's, the good thing about this is that you can use this as a, also as a search parameter. You can say, get me patient /123. Let me see if let me go to a test server. Let me go to Happy. Most of us are using Happy. So these are the patients. Let me pick one. So this is my patient, Aaron Steedeman. I don't know. That's how you would read this thing. No, Steedeman, because it's from the US. And if you have with a Polish looking like name in the address and with whatever, sorry. And if you have this, let's see his identifiers. Does he have an identifier? Nope. Nope. So this is not a good example. So this one has this other patient has an identifier. So this patient says, I have this identifier, and the identifier is a Cynthia identifier. Whatever is in the URL, you can have URLs or OIDs. But Richard, tell me if I'm expecting this wrongly. But by now you see that it's pretty much indifferent if you use OIDs or URLs, as long as it's a unique string that identifies what kind of identifier this is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, and this, so you can actually do this. I hope I remember the syntax. You can actually go to the server and say patient. You can do this, and this. So this is what you're doing as a reference. So get me the patient 638134, or you can do this where identifier equals. I think this should work. Yep, it still gives you one patient. However, you should never do this because this is the identifier. You don't know what type of identifier it is. So normally what you would do is to say, this is my identifier, and the patients, where the identifier of this type, this is the type character that you put there, is this one. Yeah, so you see, this is the computable way to do a search for this patient without knowing his or her ID in the system. If you say this is the national number or the social security number or the driver's license or whatever, this is what you put, the system ID, and then you put this. You can do this in a search. You can do this in the references, like I just showed this one. You can do this in a any references, like a medication thing. You can do this in I think you can also do this in conditional posts. You can say, please update the patient for which I have no ID. Sorry for this. I have no idea what the ID is, but I know that his identifier is this one. So you can use these things in several cases. Oops, where was I? Where is the happy thing? You can use the fact that you know the identification system and the identifier system and the identifier value. You can use this in your logical references, and that's what I would use for cross-linking those things, because you normally cannot have the literal references. You just don't know what this part of the value is. You don't know, because no one tells you. This is a randomly assigned number, and you really don't know if you have access to those things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, and this will change.
To me, sorry.
This number will change. You don't know how often it will change, but you don't care if it changes. As long as the patient doesn't change their national number, then you're fine. For example, in Belgium, national patient numbers will change, but only if there's a gender change. And in that case, I think it's still pretty much acceptable that you have to change the whole references, because that doesn't happen on average even once in a lifetime. So it's something that you have it's what it's designed for. The logical references are designed for these things. For conditional updates, conditional deletes, you can do this in the syntax without referring to the actual thing that you don't know if it exists even on the server. I mean. Make sense?
For me, that does. Thank you very much.
So Bruce, sorry, we were a bit into the weeds of this thing. I don't know if this is helpful for you as well. The cross-referencing with logical references on patients.
It's stuff that we'll be going through as well, yeah.
Okay. Anything that you want to bring else? Anything else you want to bring to this discussion? I just looked at the time now, and we're a bit late, but.
No. Quite frankly, I wasn't actually expecting to have to bring up and stuff. Oh yeah, sorry, what is it?
Oh no, I would like to follow up on the use of graph databases on patient matching and all these things. It will be nice to see how, because what you have there, if I'm not mistaken, this is pretty much your relation object that you would put in a graph database, right?
Yes.
So I think we should talk together, or at least you guys should keep some things. It would be nice to see some things emerging from these discussions, and if we can follow up. I know I'll follow individually through the work with both of the groups, but yeah, I'm happy that we found this link, and I really look forward to have graphs of connected things.
Okay, very nice.
Yeah. Rebecca, did it make sense at all what we were nerding about?
Not the specifics, but overall, yes, it was actually quite helpful to hear, just sort of eavesdrop on your thought process through this.
Right. So if you get used to the language, it's a language that I think depends on what you're doing, but it's pretty much the common. I think it's the way of talking that we would have, like, oh no, this is a way that is the standard, so we can use that way in the standard for this and that. And these are the problems in real life, like access control and all those things. So I'm happy if it's helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, and with that we are. Oh my God! Look at the time. Rhonda, do you want to take over and that we wrap up the session?
Yeah, I think we all learned a lot today. So thank you for your questions, guys. We do these monthly chats every month, middle of the month. So please bring questions. This is the exact kind of conversation we are hoping to have. So thank you for bringing your questions. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, hopefully in a few weeks. So thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, and talk to you soon. Hear you soon.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
So,
Thank you.